Hello, everyone. My name is Jamie Fiddler, and I'm very pleased to welcome you here this evening to our third keynote presentation of the Connecting Research to Practice Conference, Collaborative Creativity. I would like to take a moment just to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta. This includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. We will be recording this evening's session and making it available to all registered guests in the Connecting Research to Practice Conference. So knowing that, you are of course welcome to keep your camera off for all or part of the session if you'd prefer not to appear in the recording. I'm really excited to introduce tonight's two panel speakers. First, Dr. Robert Kelly, who is an educator, author, and artist, as well as the academic coordinator of the Collaborative Creativity for Social Innovation and Human-Centered Design grad program. His research is focused on the fields of creative development and collaborative creativity in education and the design of educational environments conducive to the growth of these two concepts. And joining him is Megan Magee. I hope I'm saying that right. Megan is a graduate student and a current cohort member of the Collaborative Creativity graduate program. She has 7 years of international teaching experience in Macau and Bangladesh. And Macau is where she is currently teaching and where she currently is. And I hear that it's tomorrow there. So welcome. Thanks for helping us greet the new day. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Kelly to get us started.
Yeah, only call me doctor if you want a prescription. Okay. So I have green pills and red pills, and all the green pills are gone because of COVID. So, and the red pills I heard are pretty good. Welcome everybody. I recognize a few faces. Yeah, hey, this year was, so this is the fourth iteration of this program, 10th year. And now we're in a new iteration going online. We were mandated online, and rightfully so because of COVID, on a program that's face-to-face, whose currency was interactivity and relationship building to build collaborative culture. And I knew we'd be going online, you know, when we in the springtime and whatever. And I thought, okay, I didn't really panic. I thought, okay, another constraint. And that's the disposition of design, right? When you approach things that you don't want to get trapped at this opportunity. And I thought, oh, this will be a great research challenge. How do we build collaborative culture in the virtual space? And I thought that was a really neat place kind of to start. And I'll just share I've got a really short thing of a screen with a lot of crunchy stuff on it. Megan's got all the fun stuff on it. And again, Megan's coming to us from Macau again, so it's Wednesday morning there now, so which I really like because she gives me all the sports scores for betting and stuff like that, so we know what happens tonight. No, I don't do that. Don't put that on Instagram or whatever. I'm going to share a screen with you right now. Just a couple of slides here, if I can. I'll just move these along. So here's how I often start when I'm talking to any kind of group, right? And what is your purpose in education? And what's your purpose or your professional space that you're in, right? And I'm thinking educationally. And I was asked this, are you an agent of positive change? Like, are you an agent of change? Is what you do on a daily basis, if you think about it, the backdrop of everything that we're doing in this last year has really brought this to focus is constant, perpetual change. And my own view is that one of the main reasons why we educate is to prepare people to adapt to constant change, but also to affect positive change. And I think educators, that would be a primary purpose, is to affect positive change. And that's one of the rationale behind this program. The other side of this coin is this: or are you a victim of the anesthesia of conditioning? One of my favorite quotes, Arthur Koestler, 1964, book on creativity, the anesthesia conditioning. We do things because it's the way it's always been done. I worry in this province with the revised curriculum initiative is kind of a throwback to maybe more consumptive years. And look at, there's a Locutus from Star Trek fame, prepare to be assimilated, and the Borg resistance is futile. It's very, very hard to not be totally suffocated by the predominant educational culture, which focuses on any number of, I think, highly consumptive discipline acquisition, knowledge acquisition, and the measurement of the retention of that as successful education. I want to put this program together around presenting a different kind of educational ecosystem that's built on collaborative creativity. And two concepts that are very difficult to understand. But before we go on, I'm looking at the critical mass of educational practice. This is Simon Starling. He's an artist, British artist, lives in Denmark right now. This is actually a performance piece they did in Loch Long in Scotland. And it's called Autopyrospicyloporus. It's got this long name. Anyways, it's a neatest story. This boat was found, was on the bottom of Loch Long. Some guy fished it off the bottom, restored it. Simon bought it, put a marine steam engine on it, and him and his assistant set off on a voyage. This is the art event, and they used the boat as fuel. So they kept ripping planks off the boat for fuel for the voyage, while to the point, if you watch the videos as it goes on, the boat sinks. This is my metaphor for the way I think traditional consumptive intense education is. It's unsustainable. I mean, equipping people just to acquire knowledge, acquisition of data, we have to go way beyond that and understand that that data has got to be strategically placed in an ecosystem, educational ecosystem, where we have a disposition that allows us to use it collaboratively and creatively for the benefit of other people, for innovations. And look at how we're adapting now in this pandemic. Constant adaptation, constant need for collaboration and stuff like that. So I thought this art piece was a really interesting metaphor. It's comical, but they fished them out of Loch Long. It's a cold place, right? This set up a 2016 book on creative development, but that why a culture of collaborative creativity. I think that's the central part. Well, for 5 reasons. It's hopeful. It's based on imagination, exploration, experimentation, and invention. It doesn't preclude discipline knowledge acquisition. What it does is it gives it a meaningful context for any learner or educator. And I'll only just skim right through this, but I wanted to look at the third principle, the principle of perpetual change and adaptation. That's a principle that we should be educating people to adapt to perpetual change, but we should be also developing in educators and learners the disposition to create perpetual positive change. Also, number one, the belief that everybody who comes through our door educationally, or every colleague that we have, has infinite potentials to develop. That doesn't get developed by making them into ingrained consumers. It gets developed by empowering them to be collaborative creators, okay, in a much different way. Now, when I was researching 2 new books out, one is this one, Collaborative Creativity, the textbook, and this supporting resource book that I co-authored with Stephanie Bartlett, Aaron Quinn, Carlos Samuelson, Keith Christensen. It's a resource book with activities. When I first started researching that, we go, well, what is collaboration? What is it? I was sitting in a restaurant with 2 research assistants and I said, what's collaboration? And they Googled it right away at the restaurant we're sitting at. And the definition they came up on Google was the exact same as cooperation. They're 2 different concepts, right? So number one, these are the 6 attributes, and this is being recorded. So the group exists for creating something new or novel. This is collaborative creativity. You leverage the diverse strengths of the group to maximize creative outcomes, okay? There's a shared vision, understanding, and purpose. Group members move from egocentric to group-centric. This is really difficult in our culture, which is primary egocentric. Highly competitive, highly individualized, not a lot of trust or whatever, depending where you are. There's a high degree of interactivity with communication characterized by open-mindedness, so on and so forth. And then the collaborative creative outcomes are something that we probably wouldn't be possible if we worked by ourselves as an individual, or it'd be very difficult. Now, this led to how are we going to measure, how are we going to assess collaborative development, especially going to a virtual environment? the way to do it I came up with, this was based on Peter Glur's research at MIT, was analyze the communication between people in the cohort and to see whether they got to a level of empathetic listening. So we have attentive, where people listen physically. We have interpretive, where we listen and ask for explanation. And we have empathetic, where we start getting to know and trust somebody and understand their emotional space. And then once we have trust, then we go to generative listening. So I was interested, and I gave our group the challenge. This won't be successful, and we're in a prototype unless we get to empathetic listening, okay? And that was our challenge throughout. And it was a really interesting challenge. And here's some stuff. This is from the new Collaborative Creativity book. I'll only look at the main headings here because of time. We have to transform to a different kind of ecosystem, I think, to really maximize potentials of learners and of educators. So on the left side, I think it represents kind of the defaults for a lot of traditional, consumptive, intense educational practice that goes on. On the right side is my ideals, not the way the truth and light, but so I look at consume to create, education that's built on creative intensity, not just consumption of data. It doesn't preclude consumption of data. It just gives it a different context, a more meaningful context, right? And then all the subheadings you can visit on the recording. Passive to interactive. Our program is action research. How are you gonna learn about collaborating and about creating unless you're actually put in those moments, unless you put in experientially? How are you gonna help somebody through all that? How are you gonna help somebody through that, a learner or whatever, unless you experience it yourself? And reflect. So action research, now we accompany it with literature-based research, but I wanted firsthand practice. We'll experience this firsthand and away we go. Authoritative to empowering. And then you get all the push to pull things, extrinsic to intrinsic motivation, top down to emergent design. And one of my favorites, pedagogy to sociogogy, where you start going from expert to the minions to people teaching each other. There's a lot of stuff here, I've got a whole chapter devoted to this stuff, but it's a really different ecosystem on the right-hand side of this chart. And compared to where we are, I think where the predominant mass is, and the current new curriculum initiatives in this province speak to the left-hand side, unfortunately, more to that than they do to the right. Now, creative development, some of you have seen this if you've been in cohorts before. This is the new construct where I've added in critical thinking, but this is an ecosystem, okay? A different ecosystem. Look in the middle about developing creatively. And that's giving individuals the capacity to engage in sustained creative design, design practice, creating original research and production, right? And it's a combination of several kind of attributes. One is collaborative and communicative development. I've already touched on that. Generating ideas, trying your ideas out in the medium of the currency of the discipline, understanding the discipline. This is how it relates. So we don't just memorize and learn knowledge and content for the purpose of that. We learn it in the context of creating something new and innovating for the benefit of others. This is loosely informed by Teresa Mobley at Harvard Business School, her componential theory of creativity, if you want to follow it up. Are we all creative? Yes. Are we all, do we have the capacity to engage in complex creative practice? Yes. Does the system foster it? Not necessarily. I think it requires a different ecosystem, a different way of understanding. Now on this chart, developing a collaborative culture. Look, we have to leverage the strength of group members, and we have to leverage collaborative innovation networks. Now, there's no reason why we should sit in a room by ourselves and wait for a psychic breeze to solve a problem. We have access to the whole planet, and I encourage the students in this cohort to develop COINs, collaborative innovation networks, something that was initiated originally by Peter Glur, and he does a feature in this my most recent book. But the innovation potentials are expanded exponentially if you have collaborative culture established in your class. That's a culture of trust, high interactivity, at a level of empathetic and generative listening before you actually engage in an innovative initiative in your class or a professional context, wherever you may be. So and here's something, we've moved now that we're online. We focus on stuff like United Nations 17 sustainable goals, global goals. These can be applied locally within a school or professional practice, or globally. And I was encouraging people, call somebody, contact them on the internet, an expert, I don't care where they live, if they can help you solve a problem. Why would you sit there when you have these resources at your fingertips? The worst thing they can do is say no. So I want people to leverage stuff, and that leads us to one of our benchmark projects that we have. In the past course that were face-to-face, course one was developing collaborative culture. And what we did was I'd give them a task that people would not be able to do by themselves, and out of their comfort zone where they really needed each other, where we had rotating leadership, honest feedback, had to do some research. And these, if you've been in the Taylor Institute the last several years, you saw the giant lobster last year, the humpback whale. I think that was the apex of my foolishness. And the more foolish it was, the better the cohort was at meeting those constraints. Unbelievable. Pot of orca whales and a life-size African elephant. And so I thought, okay, we're going online. What can I do to create an environment of action research that leads to there's 2 books I was telling you about, but I want to move on for Megan's piece. So this year, what we decided to do, I thought, well, I really like the idea of doing something that's way out there. So we did lobster last year. I figured, okay, Dungeness crab, let's do West Coast, okay, giant one. And have everybody, 22 cohort members, each do a part, but they have to work together so they fit physically, make them out of cardboard and all the paper that we normally use. And then this was in July, thinking that in the fall or the winter, and being my first pandemic, I wasn't sure, that there might be a time to open up where we could assemble them physically in the Taylor Institute or someplace like that. Well, that wasn't gonna happen. So in January, we decided to pivot, and in conversations with cohort members, we thought, okay, let's assemble this virtually. We have photos of all of them, and luckily Megan is in this cohort. She teaches at the International School of Macau, and I have to say, Megan dispositionally kind of embodies sort of this disposition of a constraint. Every obstacle is just a constraint, and we design around it. And so, anyways, Megan and I had this conversation, I had it with several people, and she said, "Well, let me find out." Megan, you're on, and the story is just brand new. It's very, very fresh.
All right, I guess I'll share a screen with me here. Hopefully everyone can see that. Okay, yeah, so, can we see that, Robert? Are we all right?
I can see Known Unknown, the hero's journey.
Awesome, okay. So as Robert was saying, I'm a teacher at the International School of Macau. And that being said, I'm an English teacher, which for me, this sort of project was daunting because I sort of think of everything in terms of narratives and archetypes and stories. And when I took time to sort of reflect back, and one of the things Robert did at the beginning of this course was he asked us to keep a metacognitive journal. So to keep track of, all of the obstacles we faced, our journey, our process, how we felt in that moment, what we loved, what we hated. And when he asked me to partake in this sort of conference here, I went back and looked through my journal, and I realized it perfectly fit into the hero's journey, the archetype. And I know it says the hero, but really, I think this sort of represents our entire cohort's journey, because we went on a huge journey all together. So just wanted to talk about that process because I teach English literature and I teach this every day. And when I look back, I was like, that's actually what sort of happened. So I went back in my journal. I found the first photo taken of our cohort, our first sort of online meeting where we got together. And the first part of the hero's journey is the call to adventure. And I know for myself, when I joined this class, I was so excited about the possibility. I saw, much like you, the photos of the giant lobster, the photos of the orca whales, and I was just so excited. And I saw this as a challenge, an obstacle. And with COVID, I thought, what an even better opportunity if we can pull this off. So for the first day when we met with Robert and Stephanie, I have them there in the yellow boxes, I think we were all excited. We were sort of sitting on this apex of adventure, and there was a lot of positive energy. And I was really psyched. But immediately after that, we transitioned to a refusal of the call. And so, after the first 20, 30 minutes of the call where we were really excited about getting this done, it's sort of when doubt started setting in. I felt there was a lot of anxiety in the group. People were asking questions, and sort of we had this culture of doubt. Could we do this? And not just, any normal project, but with COVID, there was all these new constraints. So I know there's a lot of pushback from the cohort. We started, going back to traditional views of education. We started thinking about, how's this going to affect my mark? What if we don't pull this off? There was a lot of complaining going on, and I started mentally jumping on that bandwagon as well. It was sort of a domino effect where I kind of went from this high, and when I started hearing, these sort of, restrictions and complaints and pushbacks, I started thinking, how am I going to get this done as well? Why should I be so positive if I hear so much negativity? And I heard a lot of conversations going on, can we change the project? What's the point of doing this if we can't meet up? How can we be collaborative if we're not all there together? So sort of immediately after this day, I kind of, rejected my call to adventure, which was sort of a low point. And after that, I sort of had the shakes, a lot of anxiety, and I thought, I've made a mistake. And I thought everyone else is realizing this as well. And then going forward, I kind of go into the supernatural aid, the threshold into the unknown phase. And I do a lot of scuba diving in my spare time. I try to do 50 to 60 dives a year if there is no COVID. And one of the big things with scuba diving is you taking a risk every time you dive in. You don't know what's below it. You hope to God your oxygen's working. You hope you have a team of scuba divers who are going to help you. You hope you have a leader who's going to let you know what depth you're at, when to come up, and when to return. And so that supernatural aid, sort of the mentors, came from Robert and Stephanie. And during this time of doubt and rejection of the project, they sort of, reassured us we had the oxygen, that we were going to be okay to jump into the unknown, and that, we didn't know what was down there, but we were going to get through to the other side. So this is a photo that I've taken of myself scuba diving, me jumping off the dock. It was at this moment, Robert and Stephanie said, can you trust us? Can you just, let it go? Can you just, trust we're going to get you through to the end? Can you dive, head in? So it was sort of in this moment, week one, for myself and most of the cohort, we kind of, got on board with it. We said, what, just give it your 100%, just jump in. And then we sort of hit the next phase of the road of trials, the challenges and temptations road, where we were fully invested, we were on board, we had this positive, optimistic attitude. And then we kind of kept hitting roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. And, we either had successes or failures or had to find another route. So as Robert was saying, there was more constraints this year. And I think that was sort of really getting to our cohort in general. We had to keep finding another way. So one of the big things we started out with was the measurements. Robert gave us sort of the initial span of the carapace of the crab. And, one of the big things was, we're all around the world, we're in different locations. How are we each going to get a Dungeness crab? Being here in Macau, China, we don't have Dungeness crabs. So I went to the markets, I found 4 or 5 different types of crabs, and I had to rely on my other teammates. So kind of going into that threshold into the unknown, I had to start trusting my cohort members who I'd never met, who I didn't really know, and I had to trust them. So luckily we had 2 members in our cohort who had access to the Dungeness crab, and they took those initial measurements, and it was sort of this this temptation. We could have given up, but we went forward, we found one, we did the measurements, we put them online. The next step going forward was we had to figure out, how are we going to divide up this crab? There's 22 of us. It's one, crab. How are we going to do this in remote parts? So it was a really good part where we sat down and kind of delved into that empathetic listening about what skills we each had, what were our strengths and weaknesses, who needed additional support while they were at home during COVID, who had access to cardboard, who was great at pattern building, who was great at digital design, who had that creativity, who was organized. And it was sort of at this moment in July, we realized, we had all the parts, we just had to divide up the labor. And, it was sort of this domino effect that, if one of us could do it, all of us could do it. Moving forward, we kind of went into the design phase, and this was sort of I think, the most difficult phase for us, where we had probably the most conflict. Personally, for me, I wanted to go a specific route, which I'll talk about, but the whole design process, our cohort kind of went into looking at what previous years had done. We kind of, said, let's play it safe. Let's look at, the past designs of the last 4 years. Let's just play it safe. Let's copy exactly what previous years had done. And for me, that sort of didn't settle well, because this is supposed to be innovation. I want to do something more. I don't want to just copy a template that someone else had made. So this sort of really didn't resonate with me. So what I decided to do is, while I was in China, I didn't have access to a physical crab. I decided to build my own crab. So I went online and I did a lot of research, and I found someone had already created an origami crab. And it took 16 hours to build. And, for me to really get my head wrapped around this, since we all couldn't be there to physically work together, I thought, why not use origami? Why not use a template that's already been made, and we can modify it according to fit a Dungeness crab? So on my own, I built this large, huge origami crab that took me about 3 days to build. And I was super proud of it. And when I presented it to our group, there was a lot of rejection, because it was sort of into the unknown. Our group sort of looked at previous years and they said, no one's really done origami. Let's play it safe. And so there was a lot of backlash from this idea. And in the end, our cohort decided to not go with this idea, which was a little bit infuriating. But, especially during this time, majority sort of ruled. And, we wanted to be successful. And this was a gamble. And, I could see that it was a successful origami project, but, I didn't want to put that at risk for the rest of the group. That this one idea, if it didn't work out, everyone's grades, we might not make it. So we had to sort of reject that idea. So on my part, one of the big things was we had to have all our pieces in Canada and Calgary for the final assembly, but I was in China. So I took that as another struggle. So what I did was I did all my measurements for my piece with my partner, Miriam, and I had to build my piece in Macau, China. So I spent a couple weekends building this, and I came up with my design plan. So I did all my measurements, and I came up with this template. And one of the things that I realized was my strength was I'm a knitter. I love to make patterns. I love to follow patterns. So I found this natural talent, but I had to figure out how I could get someone in Calgary to make my part. And I really didn't want to place a pressure on another cohort member to build 2 parts. I really thought that was sort of unfair. So like Robert was saying, with every problem, there's a solution. You just have to be willing to look around. So I contacted as many people as I could in Calgary, friends and family. And I was lucky enough to realize that my dad had just retired and he was incredibly bored at home. So I reached out to my dad and I sort of proposed this to him, and I showed him my templates and I showed him my process. And my dad looked at me and he said, no problem. And my dad was really excited to complete it because he was living in Calgary, he had a lot of time on his hands. So what we did was, over about a weekend, we did Zoom calls, and I had my project and then he had his project. So I was guiding him through that process, doing my templates and measurements. So at the end, it was really cool that I had my piece on my side of the world and the exact same replica my dad had. So it was really neat to see the sort of process unfold. But then we kind of got to November, December as a cohort, which I call this the abyss, the ordeal, the death, and the rebirth, where everyone in our whole cohort had built their pieces. We had 22 separate pieces, and they were just sort of sitting in our living rooms and garage. And Robert can kind of attest to this. We didn't know what to do next. We were at the very bottom, and we kind of got into this level of depression. We were kind of sitting there just waiting at the bottom. And we were looking for the light at the tunnel of, we've built our pieces, now how do we assemble it? We physically can't get together. And every week we were looking at the news, we were looking to the Alberta government. Can we get together? Can we assemble this? Can we get into the University of Calgary? Can 2 people meet up? And more layers of obstacles were coming up. Some of the cohort members, they didn't have space in their houses. They had families, kids, pets. They couldn't keep this large 10-meter long leg in their house any longer. So we sort of were sitting at this 2-month low. And I know personally for me, I was going back and forth with my dad, who also had the crab piece, and I was talking to other members in our cohort. And it was sort of this level of pessimism now, where we sort of, we we've halfway got there. We did our job and we just couldn't finish it. And we were really sort of struggling to, what do we do next? So I kind of felt this is sort of the death of the group. But luckily in January, we kind of moved into this sort of revelation transformation moment. And this is where Robert sort of sat down with the cohort and he said, we're going to have to do this a different way. There's no way we're going to get together at the U of C. We're going to have to figure out another way to assemble this. And this is where he sort of branched out and asked some cohort members, including myself, how can we get this done? And it was sort of at this moment I realized I had the answer in front of me the whole time, that we had to do this digitally. And I looked around at our cohort and none of us were sort of digital designers. None of us were really tech savvy. And I realized I had the answer in front of me the whole time. And that's where I got my kids. So luckily enough, at my school at TIS, the International School of Macau, we haven't had a case of COVID in over 300 days. So we were lucky enough that we could see each other every day. And something funny enough is in all three of these photos with my students, they were very aware of the project I was doing because I was so excited about it. They had seen my piece at school. They had seen my origami crab. And over the months, I kept showing them the progress of our cohort. And, they kind of kept bugging me saying, when's it going to get done? When's the final piece? How's everyone else doing? And I approached them. I said, how could we take 22 pieces all around the world? We had some people in Vancouver, some people in the territories, some in Calgary, I myself in China. How can we take all these pieces without meeting together? How can we put them together? And it was really funny because I had thought this was the most difficult task. And the students looked at me and they said, why are you worried? This is easy. They looked at me like I was crazy. They're like, Miss, this will take, a couple hours to do. Like, I don't see what the big deal is. So I asked my students, who would be willing to participate, who had the skills to do this, who'd be willing to do some prototyping. And altogether, I had 12 students step up. So the first things that we did was, we took my actual crab piece at school and I said, let's prototype this before I ask all 22 of us to, go into that unknown again. So my students were really brave and they decided, all right, let's take photos of your piece from different angles. Let's see if we can Photoshop it, crop it, manipulate it. And what programs can we use? How can we make this the most simple, easiest process? So just like we did back in July, I applied the same steps. We said, what materials do we have? What are our limits? What are our constraints? How can someone living in Vancouver or someone living in Edmonton or Calgary or someone East Coast, how can they follow these steps of, they don't have an iPad, if they don't have, these programs, they don't have an iPhone 12, they don't have, HD cameras, how can they complete this task? So my students were really amazing in that they were able to sort of solve every problem. And it was this sort of transformational moment that I had the answer in front of me. If I had just reached out earlier, I could have found this, solution earlier in the program. And I kind of was kicking myself saying, I was so excited to tell everyone what I was doing, but I didn't stop and ask, how can you help? What do you have that can help me? So that was sort of like an awakening moment. All right, so I'm going to show you a quick video of my students' process. So what they essentially did was we reached out to the cohort. We asked every member to take 5 photos of their piece from different angles, and we assembled it together digitally. So we took each piece, we cropped it, and we put it together. So this is a sped up version where students were taking the initial pieces and they were cropping them using Procreate and Photoshop. So they took each individual piece from each cohort member's home and they put it together, and it sort of became this Frankenstein crab where it didn't look really pretty, not everything matched. But in the end, they were able to finish it. So in the end,
that's the underside view, right?
Yeah, that's the underside view. So let me get to the other views there. There we go. All right. So this is from the right side of the crab. So Robert he had a really great idea. He said, I don't just want your students to make this. I want them to put it back in the University of Calgary. Its natural habitat where we would have normally seen it. So he took 5 different angles from the university. And so the students did their different renditions from different angles. And because we had 22 different pieces, the idea was we really wanted everyone's piece to be appreciated. I think that's an important step in a project where everyone's acknowledged, everyone can see, the fruit of their efforts. So I asked the students to do a photo in the university and a creative photo of the crab in its natural habitat on the beach. And I had, we asked them to do an aerial view and also a bottom view. So it looks a little Frankenstein-y. It doesn't really match. Some pieces look like sushi. Some pieces look very sort of robotic, steampunkish. You know, it was all there. You know, it was just, I needed these students to complete it. There's again from the right side view. Here's it from the left side view. So one of the things the students kind of kept bringing up was, you know, can we just, you know, mirror image? Can we just use the same parts over and over again? And, you know, I think it was important to make sure everyone was acknowledged. So here's it from the left side view. Here's it from the front, which was probably one of the most difficult ones, but it actually looks like it's in the University of Calgary. And this is it from the aerial view. So this would have been to scale. So the students thought about things like shadowing, scaling, and yeah, overall, it looked great. So just coming back to this sort of hero's journey at the end of it, you know, we went from the known of we know how to do projects, we know how to collaborate, and then we really went to this unknown space. And COVID sort of threw a wrench into the whole process. And you know, we went from the call to adventure to having our aides, our sort of, you know, our Gandalfs, our Dumbledores along the way, which are Robert and Stephanie. And then we went into these challenges and temptations to give up and surrender and to fight, and you know, and then we hit this sort of death at the end, right? We just thought, you know, it's not possible. This was the biggest obstacle in our course. And then eventually we got to the transformation, the atonement, and the return back to the known. And about an hour ago, I released the photos that my students had completed to the 22 members of the cohort, and they can't be more, you know, than ecstatic. I think it's been, we were originally supposed to complete this task in, you know, 2 weeks. And then with COVID, you know, it was going to be 2 months. And then we said we were going to get it done by Christmas, and now it's February. So it's been almost 6 months. And, you know, we went from optimistic to pessimistic to rejection, and now we're back where we started. So that's pretty much the whole project, the process. But in the end, it worked out, but it wouldn't have worked out if we didn't ask for help.
Just to put everything in context, this is only course one. There's 4 courses in this program. Actually, the meat of the program is supposed to be, well, they're engaged in it right now, is getting into small groups and choosing a social innovation or human-centered design, either global or immediate workplace for them to work on throughout the duration of the program. And so this is the front lens or the front end to establish culture, group norms, to do all kinds of metacognitive, reflective inquiry, right? And it's not easy, boy, because when you're making a culture transition, and Megan spoke about it, the stress levels are high. And when you put COVID over top of that, reading the metacognitive journals of the educators in this cohort was really quite something, to see the profound stress everybody was under with the unknown and worried about getting ill or bringing illness into family members and stuff like that, and not knowing about that, right? So it was a moving target, but I'm happy we found a resolution. There's always a way, and I mean, we have people in this room right now. I mean, we have Lee Ludis was involved in the giant humpback whale project, and he was instrumental in its success. And Carla Nickel was involved in the lobster, the giant lobster piece. That's why we have a Dungeness crab this year. We did East Coast last year and this year. Now people seem to know the program for these big constructs, but that's actually not the focus of the program. It's not a craft thing or whatever. It's creating an action research context for people to come together where they need each other, where they have to develop levels of trust, where I can't do this alone. And another part of this is, if you had told all of us that a group of grade 11 students in Macau would have been building this construct for us, we would have told you were crazy. But that was the whole notion of collaborative innovation networks, leveraging all of these assets that you have. So when we first gave this, the initial anxiety Megan talked about was, a lot of people don't have any background in constructing stuff. How am I going to build a crab claw out of a giant one on top of that out of cardboard? The goal here is to leverage the assets that you have access to. family members, who's in your bubble, anybody online, and get people. So I wanted them to move into that space, always with trepidation. But you know what? That happens. That's the way it goes. Normally, we would have had it done in a week. Have that done, establish preliminary communicative baselines and foundations and group norms. Then we move on into the social innovation piece that lasts for about 10 months, 9 or 10 months, right? So it was different this year, different roadmap. But hey, the photos, the pictures that Megan just showed you, we just got an hour and a half, 2 hours ago. So this is just hot off the press. So I was happy to see the preliminary one yesterday, and that's it. Then the next iteration, we're taking registrations now. It's moving more towards social innovation. Will we do something like this for the first course? I don't know. I'm always experimenting. You see, we're in a design program, right? I'm asking people to prototype, to experiment. Megan referred to the concept of playing it safe. J.K. Rowling's in her keynote to Harvard's graduating class in 2008 was entitled "Playing It Safe is Failure by Default." People are so risk averse. They've been so conditioned to being extrinsically motivated. Is this what you want? Is this what you want? They're trying to perform to a predisposed outcome when really what I would like them to do is move into a culture where they empower themselves and see these obstacles as constraints and not block. We had blocking, we had anxiety, we had stress, we had pushback. I'm used to it. Usually it only lasts for a few days. This time it got drawn out and whatever, but we managed to solve it. And it was by communicating and by leveraging the strengths of group members and by leveraging collaborative innovation networks. So you imagine what's possible. You imagine any problem would come your way, personal problem, work problem, with a learner. If you mobilize the resources and you have the whole globe at your disposal, and you had a disposition of design that these things might be solvable, or at least be able to improve them or make them bearable. That's what lies before us. But I'll tell you my experience is, I worry that so many of us going through regular education systems have become mindless consumers of data, passive, mindless consumers of data. Don't get me wrong, it's important to know about stuff, but it's important to be able to use that stuff for the purpose of benefiting others. So the closing comment for me before we do any Q&A is that just think about this. Think about this whole thing. If you really understand, first of all, the concept of creativity, a sequence of thought and action that leads to novel adaptive production, okay? And the principle of infinite potentials, the principle of perpetual change, all of that stuff. We really understand collaboration versus cooperation. Collaboration where I engage in empathetic listening. I trust you. We leverage the strengths of people in the group. We seek out more strengths. We're okay with rotating leadership. We have a shared vision. All of those stuff. You can wake up every morning to unlimited possibilities. Every morning, and I'm not just saying that, you can wake up every morning to unlimited possibilities. What would stop you? But you realize how many people self-block. Oh, I'll never do that. I can't do that. I won't do that later. Oh, we can't do that. Megan experienced it in our program, was blocked several times. We got blocked, and we all got blocked. A lot of anxiety. Often we're worried about how we look in front of each other. So Megan talked about it as well. My first goal, and it wasn't easy, was to create a safe environment. And then from a safe environment where people are free to experiment and do ideas and try different ideas. And then for me in Prinsloo, one of the guests in the new book, he used to be former artistic director of Theatre Calgary. He says you move from safe environments to brave environments. So safe first, then brave. We move from positive everything to honest feedback. That's Peter Glor from MIT, who has a feature in this book as well. So we try and move along. So I'm looking developmentally. I'm not out to measure the students. We're out to help people develop. And the only way we can do that in these kinds of things is firsthand engagement, firsthand research, action research, and reflective inquiry. And then anyways, and that's it. about it. And for me to talk that little is an amazing feat for those of you that know me. So, hey, questions, let's open up. Unmute everybody, and let's, you can unmute and put your videos on unless you're in your pajamas or something or whatever. Yeah, fire away if you have any questions or comments. Be interested in hearing them. Or reflections, jokes, riddles. Hey, don't all go at once though, okay? It's so hard to hear when people go all at once at the same time.
I can start.
Okay.
Sorry, Carla, were you about to go?
Nope, I'll go after you.
Thank you, Robert and Megan, for sharing. Robert sent me an email, I guess last week, and just with the call to spread the word about the program again this year, and then told me about this project. So I was super curious about how you made it happen. So absolutely amazing to see how you went about it. So thank you for sharing your journey. I love your metaphor as a literature teacher. I thought that was fascinating. I do want you to realize that you were looking to play it safe by looking at past ways things have been done. You do know that the humpback whale fell over, right? You did hear that story? Yeah. So it's funny that I was just telling my students that story this past week, and they were completely blown away that we rebuilt it in a day in a completely different orientation. So it was it's just an absolutely amazing process to go through and to be a part of, and you got to feel that angst for a little longer than the rest of us who'd been through that journey before. But kudos to you, and thanks for sharing.
Well, thank you, Lee. So here, just to put this in a context, a month before Lee's cohort started, that would have been 2018, right? 2018. My partner and I, Carla, we were in the, Carla Samuelson, we were in the Spark Center, and there was a whale exhibit from New Zealand. And on the ceiling, they had a skeleton of a 60-foot sperm whale. And it said the length of it. And that was the assignment I gave them. You're to build an adult female humpback whale to scale, proportionally correct, 60 feet long. Carla looked at the whale in the sign. She goes, "Do you realize that's 60 feet? I said, "Oh yeah." She goes, "What on earth were you thinking? What were you thinking?" We got to the Taylor Institute first day of class, and I had a research assistant. He said, "We should measure this space out. We're going to block fire exits." And we did. And I go, "Oh man, what was I thinking? I hadn't thought of the girth of this thing." But an adult female humpback whale is 45 to 60 feet long. So I went in the room that morning. People started working on that first task. It's one of 3 learning tasks for that first course. And I said, just cut your measurements down by 25%. Even then at 45 feet, it had a 12-foot, 3.5-meter girth. Now we got safety problems. They got it built by Thursday, 6 o'clock. That's working in afternoons just for 1 week, for 4 days. And I'm going, wow, I thought it was impossible. It fell over in the middle of the night. I arrive at 9 o'clock on the Friday morning. They have it all rebuilt, half, so it looks like it's coming out of the water. They totally redivided. And I thought, wow, failure recovery, one of the best indicators of somebody with a disposition of design. And Lee,
Robert, we still talk about the fact that we're convinced you pushed it over.
No, my heart was broken. I go, all that work, and I'm going, and weighed a ton. I'm worried about somebody getting killed, and it wouldn't be the first time I get in trouble for something like that. But it was pretty risky. But here's the thing. You ask your students or colleagues or whatever to design and to take risks. You want them to be creative, you have to embody it. You have to live it with them. You can't ask them, not do as I say, it's do as I do. And I tell the students from day one, you are in a prototype. I'm prototyping here. Now have an idea that it might work. And thank heavens with people like Megan and Lee and Carla, these things do work, right? But I trust the process that I know if you just give the constraints and prepare the culture that it eventually pays off. And it seems to be very consistent. This was a little different because of COVID. A lot of stress, a lot of fatigue, and a lot of fear just got amplified, right? But we worked through it. So other questions? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think just sort of on that, like Lee and Robert, just, the humpback whale, when it fell apart, I feel like that was our COVID moment, the abyss. It was just like, it was this death moment. Like, what do we do now? Right. And we just sort of fell apart and we're like, we're done. And then it was just sort of this rebirth process, like getting the motor going again, like for the humpback whale, like, let's just rebuild it. Let's come up with something new, right? What can we do? What can we do? And just not taking no for an answer. That was the big thing. Because if we did, it would have been the death and our journey would have just stopped, right?
There's a lot of students who want me to stop the project, but I wouldn't. so when Megan and I finally found a way, what was a number of people had a discussion, right? When I sent the email out, I said, you do not have to participate. If you're tired, fatigued, not feeling well, just let me know, and then we'll have the design team at Megan's school. They can compensate by airbrushing or something like that. Every one of them submitted. Every one of them, which I was really happily surprised by. But I gave them an out, and I apologize. I realized it was a kind of a nuisance after a while, but that was only one portion. Then my goal would be to take the group norms and what you learned from that action research and apply that to the dynamic of doing a real world problem of social innovation or human-centered design for a real world context. Now you've got the United Nations Sustainable Goals, OECD stuff in Paris. I mean, there's a ton of stuff, and we all want to make a difference, not to be just passive consumers of data. There's so much more to education than that. And it's sad when I see the direction some of the education stuff is going in. But if you want to be in the frontier, prepare to take hits, prepare to take risks, because it's not going to come easy. But if you stay the course, like I started off, if you're not an agent of change, what are you an agent of? What are you an agent of? Ask yourself that. As an educator, what are you an agent of? Hey, other questions? Carla, did you want to pipe in?
Sure, I will. It's nice to see you, Robert, and Meg.
Likewise.
Wonderful sharing that. What an adventure, what a journey, and the fact, that obviously it's all through COVID. That's really amping up the creativity and the design thinking and all the rest. I agree with everything that Lee said about that. Robert, I just wondered if you might comment just a little bit about, the nature of being online, and you were, outstanding at creating that emotionally safe environment, which was so important, to amp up our creativity and to gel as a group. If you could maybe speak about the challenges and some of the things that work to create that safe space, that trusting environment when you're not face to face. I mean, for me, I think it was like summer camp when we were with you during the summer, and we just really gelled, and that took us throughout the year. So I'm curious to know how you tackled that. It's
the question, and it's the central question. My biggest fear was, and I use it as a research piece, because this is a research thing for me, pedagogically, right? So I thought, number one, what we missed in the online environment was ambient socializing. So when you're face to face, you're side by side with someone, you're going for lunch, you're working there on something, and you're talking about children, experiences, holidays, hobbies, and you get to know and you get to understand them, and you get to know and you feel safer and safer and safer. And then you get to understand their emotional space and their context. And then we get to a level of trust. Collaborative culture will not occur until you have trust. Trust will not occur until you get to a level of empathetic listening. Now, I use Cohen's model for deep listening. So it's a physical, attentive, interpretive, empathetic, generative. So I frame that right in the beginning when we first met. People weren't sure what it meant till we actually got into it. And that's by assessing the interactivity. But my problem online was I wasn't privy to all the conversations that you are face to face. So people were having conversations in little groups and stuff like that, and I don't hear them. And it was really hard for me to get my finger on the pulse of what the nature of the interactivity was, right? How much of it was empathetic, how much was polite, and all this stuff. And to segue a bit, for the Collaborative Creativity book that came out in 2020, I contacted Peter Glure at MIT, who I've mentioned a couple times. He came out with a thing, and the 7 honest signals of collaboration, right? And his research, his crew, they do analysis of the communication, email communications in innovative corporations from bottom to top. They look at all the email and they do an analysis of the kind of language you're using and stuff like that. That's where I sort of got the idea for using that as an assessment tool for understanding the level of listening. that would be an indicator of collaborative development, right? So what happened was, it wasn't until we got to reviewing metacognitive journals. The metacognition piece was huge. Reflexive and reflective inquiry was huge. It had to manifest itself in metacognitive journaling. And in metacognitive journaling, that's where I got the reveal. And people just unloaded, let it all out, the stuff. And the ones that were the best were the people were able to examine themselves, reflexive inquiry, and their own socialization. And go, oh, this is the only way I've known. Now we're going to a new space or whatever, and they felt uncomfortable. Some people didn't get as far as I like this, I don't like that. That's often the first step. So one thing with the online environment was if people wanted to stay on their side of the fence, it was easier to. So I had to constantly try and draw them in. Online speed dating, one-on-one idea generation, group stuff or whatever, tons of group stuff. And then after the summer experience, I had 2 undergraduate design classes. Then I really went to town. Okay, now I'm in the saddle now. So what I did with my undergraduate classes, so I see twice a week for 2.5 hours, I would meet them 1 week, highly interactive, and then I would meet each student every second week, one-on-one, to the whole semester. You know how many hundreds of Zoom meetings that was? But it worked. And they were talking with each other. I knew them. It was incredible. But I was trying to figure out where is the threshold for developing that interactive, safe environment. Number one, they had to trust me. Number one, right? Then they had to start trusting each other. So I do that now. It's kind of the format I use for undergraduate classes. I'll bring that to the new cohort. Highly interactive, and I meet a ton. So I have Zoom on demand, Zoom meetings on demand with any student. So, because I have nothing to do, right? I live in Cochrane and there's nothing to do here. It's 35 below zero. And all you do is look at the mountains and watch reruns of Beat Bobby Flay. I mean, I can't do that anymore. So that's, I hope that answers, but it was a trickle. It was slower. Then I started looking for what were the triggers. And it was an intense one-on-one small group interactivity. It's catalytic. Other comments, questions that people want to share? Reflections.
Thank you so much. I love this. I love this discussion about creating trust in the online environment. I'll just mention there are a couple conversations going on in the chat. Abigail, who loves that idea of brave spaces as an antidote to that vulnerability. And Carolyn just posted something which I haven't had a chance to look at yet. But I wonder if you, maybe Megan, can speak to how has this changed your teaching, this experience and this deeper understanding of creativity?
I mean, in terms of, just make sure my audio's on. Yeah, I think one of the first things, what Robert was just talking about is building this level of trust. And especially right now, when we're doing online learning with students and we just started semester 2, I see that there's more layers to creativity that, the students have to build that trust with me. They have to build trust with each other before they even go into this brave new space where they're vulnerable and, they're willing to fail. Especially sort of in high stakes programs with my students, they're secondary students, they're doing their diplomas, they're doing their IB exams, and failure to them is not an option. And so, getting them to know each other and trust each other's skills was a huge move. And I see myself now, or I even saw in September, that first week of school where usually I just dive into review right away. I literally just put the first week of school on pause and just said, let's share stories about each other. Let's share anecdotes. Let's connect with each other, and I've just seen a dramatic shift in the way my students interact with each other and interact with me. And I used to be a very kind of closed off teacher, and I had this very sort of line in the sand between academics and personal life. And now, when I'm sure when I go to school today in about an hour, my students will be like, how did the conference go? How are things? They know exactly what's sort of going on in my life. And they ask me about my holidays, what I'm planning to do. How's my mom? How's my dad? And I find there's just a lot more conversation. Just have this better understanding of creativity. And I used to get really upset with students about, why aren't you working together? Why, when I put you together to do this creative project, why did it fall apart? And I was like, why don't you like each other? I used to just say, get over it. like just get over it, focus on the task, get it done. And I realized there's more to that. So yeah, it's changed my approach to projects and how I present that to students.
Just to add on to that, one of the very first activities we did, we were in groups of 4. I had everybody design picnics for each other, metaphorical picnics. In order to do that, you have to not just a menu where here's what I want. We had to interview the person we're designing for and design a metaphorical picnic for them. You know, and so I had to get to know them. I was working design teams of 2, and that was wildly successful. It was actually really good. And I wasn't sure because I was just experimenting. I wasn't sure if it was working, but the feedback we got later, again in the journals, was that I should have done a lot more of that as we went along, right? Because it broke that stuff down, because they got to play without being judged and whatever, and people enjoyed reading. What kind of picnic did you design? I was part of it. I was part of the group, and I was designing for someone, and they were designing mine, and mine was bang on. I forget what it was, Don Quixote, and what was the other one? Some bad character or whatever, I don't know. But it was hilarious. So that kind of stuff, right? And that's that graph I showed where you build culture first before you actually get into the meat. And I think that's even more important in a virtual environment, getting back to Carla's question.
Yeah, and I think it was funny when we were building those picnics, before we even knew it was going to happen, you know, a creative project was going to be built within it. You asked us to share 2 stories about ourselves. You said, share 2 stories that really represent who we are. And I remember the night I got the email, I spent like 30 minutes, you know, thinking, you know, reflecting, you know, what really represents me? What sort of funny story, you know, is me in a nutshell? And I wrote it down and kind of planned it out. And then when we got into our groups, I realized my other 3 group members didn't think about it. They were just like, oh, you know, I don't really have any stories. And so I went first and told my story, and it ended up being like a 15-minute story. And the rest of my group members went, you know what, I need to, you know, give me 10 minutes. I need to rethink my story, because, you know, like, we all have something to say, and I want to get to know you. I see how much you've invested. And, you know, when I make this picnic for you, I want to do it justice. So I think it was really interesting just to sort of be vulnerable, and having people, you know, as soon as you have one person open up, it's this domino effect, right? If one person's willing to be vulnerable, you know, it really opened it up. So I think if on that first day I didn't tell my story and tell something sort of like dark that happened in my life, or something really positive and, you know, embarrassing, the rest of my group would have just kind of told these midline stories that, you know, weren't really honest and authentic.
Well, you know, I had to design, my partner was Lauren Hudson. She's one of our cohort members from Victoria. We had to design for another cohort member, Shiroji McDonald. Shiroji's the nicest person you'll ever meet. She's an aggregator. She likes family around. And we interviewed her. She's a painter, but she's a science background and heavy design background. And I said, you can set your picnic wherever you want. Well, the setting for her picnic was a Van Gogh painting. That's what we were doing, metaphors, right? So we set the picnic in a Van Gogh painting, and I forget, Lauren came up, we had a blanket, and it was all a bunch of sample things designed for people to come in, because that's what she liked. She liked to aggregate people in, the more people that came around. And it wasn't so much about the food, it was about who she was, right? And it was so much fun doing that. And I'm sorry I didn't do a lot more of it as I went on. Stress was on all sides, my side too, right? Being confined to barracks. I wouldn't make a very good prisoner, I don't think. So anyways, any other comments or questions? It's been fun.
I have one other comment. So one of the big things that was kind of nice, because we did the 2-week in person, was that second week of celebration and seeing the whale up. For us, now that you've finally got your students' work together, and your cohort has seen these images just hours ago, what's the plan for celebration?
I mean, I can speak on my behalf. I just sent them out an hour ago, and everyone's slowly responding. I'm seeing on Slack and, you know, on D2L and that. And I mean, I think the idea would be to have like a Zoom celebration, you know, have everyone with a glass of wine and cheers it. And the next step, now that these photos are done, my vision is everyone will take a photo of themselves, and we can actually put everybody in the photo of us standing around the crab. And I'm just like, this sort of united photo, you know, print it out, put it up on the wall, put it in your portfolio. But, you know, because I think that would have been the idea of having a group photo. So Yeah, I know, Robert, you want to do t-shirts or jackets for the cohort, if that's still happening, but.
I told the court they had to go fundraise door to door to raise money for jackets, right? During a pandemic, right? No, I'm staying out of this part. I'm happy that that's done. So a design error on my part was deferring the actual build till the fall. And the reason for that was I had another different instructor that I wasn't expecting for the other course, which was very literature intense, reading intense, very more of a traditional course. Students felt the load, plus they decided to have everything 6 weeks and courses concurrent. So I'm the coordinator, so I lessened the load in the first course by deferring it. And that was a mistake. We should have just put the pedal to the metal and just got it done in 5 days. And I was trying to accommodate workloads and stuff like that because we were being advised to do that. You know what I mean? To back off a little bit because of COVID. So next iteration will be very, very different. I already have the dates up and stuff like that. Highly interactive. I don't know if we're going to do a project like this. I've got a few thoughts, but they stay under wraps for a while. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what will happen. I have to look at the journals again and stuff like that and whatever. But I have to have the program going. We're in the application phase right now. Applications close March 1st, right? So yeah, we're just seeing, we're just registering now. So hopefully there's enough. I'm not sure how many what's the threshold, Jamie, do you think?
About 15.
15, which is pretty high considering they have 27 programs offered this year instead of 16 last year. So getting 15 will be a challenge for a lot of programs. So we'll see. Anyways, proof's always in the pudding.
Thanks so much for sharing your plans for celebration, and thanks Robert and Megan for sharing your process tonight. One thing I really appreciated about this conversation is that it included, the impacts that stress is having on our teaching and learning and all the uncertainty and how, we're not sure what to do. In a sense, we're all in a space where a lot of creativity is required. So I appreciate hearing your theory and practice of creativity as it unfolded in this program. So yeah, thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining us as well.
Well, thanks for inviting us. So I really enjoyed it. Thanks, Megan.
Hey, thanks, right.
Yes.